They knock on your door with a friendly smile, holding glossy magazines and talking about paradise on earth. But what really happens behind the closed doors of Jehovah's Witnesses? What few dare to say about this organization? Today, we're going to delve into a story that many people are unaware of, a hidden reality behind the public image of this religious group. Have you ever wondered how they really function? What do they truly believe? What rules govern their lives? Prepare yourself, because what we're about to reveal may surprise you. Few people know that behind the official history of Jehovah's Witnesses, there are details that are rarely mentioned and even concealed. To fully understand this movement, we need to go back to the 19th century when a young man named Charles T. Russell began to question traditional Christian doctrines. Born in 1852 in the United States, Russell grew up in a deeply religious environment. But his dissatisfaction with church teachings led him to seek answers on his own. Inspired by Adventist movements and other religious currents of the time, he began to develop his own interpretations of the Bible, laying the foundations for what would later become Jehovah's Witnesses. From the beginning, Russell believed he was uncovering hidden truths in the scriptures. He studied intensively and published various writings on prophecies and the return of Christ. One of his most striking beliefs was the claim that the end of the world was near. In 1876, he claimed that Jesus Christ had invisibly returned to the world in 1874, and that in 1914, the end of human governments would come to make way for God's kingdom. Thousands of followers adopted this expectation, awaiting a catastrophic event in that year. However, when 1914 arrived and nothing happened, the organization had to adjust. Far from disappearing, the movement grew even stronger. After Russell's death in 1916, his successor Joseph Rutherford transformed the Watchtower Society into a highly centralized and authoritarian structure. It was under his leadership that the group officially adopted the name Jehovah's Witnesses in 1931 and established rigid standards for its members. Rutherford also reinforced the practice of door-to-door evangelism, making it one of the group's trademarks. Over time, new prophecies failed, such as predictions for 1925 and 1975, which also announced the end of the world. However, the organization managed to adapt and continue to grow. Today, Jehovah's Witnesses are present in almost every country in the world, with millions of followers who dedicate their lives to preaching and absolute obedience to the Watchtower leaders. But despite its growth and image of a peaceful and united community, there are many little-known truths about its history and internal workings that few dare to tell. Even their own members rarely question this. Over the years, the Jehovah's Witnesses organization has consolidated with an increasingly rigid hierarchical structure. At the top is the Watchtower, the entity that governs and guides the members, considered by the organization as the exclusive channel of communication between God and men. Followers are taught to obey this leadership without questioning. Absolute obedience to Watchtower leadership is seen as a matter of salvation, creating an environment in which conformity to the organization's standards and teachings is more important than anything else, including personal well-being. Among the most controversial and alarming doctrines of Jehovah's Witnesses is the prohibition of blood transfusions. For the organization, blood is sacred, and its ingestion or transfusion is considered a direct violation of God's laws. This belief has led many members of the community to refuse essential medical treatments when they involve the use of blood, often resulting in preventable deaths. Families face devastating dilemmas, as they not only fear for the lives of their loved ones but also need to deal with the pressure to follow this principle without the support of doctors or even close relatives. Another highly controversial aspect is excommunication. Those who do not strictly follow the rules or question the authority of the Watchtower can be expelled, leading to total rejection by the community. This measure involves cutting all ties with friends, family, and even one's own children, turning expulsion into a sentence of loneliness and social isolation. The consequences can be devastating, leaving those affected without any emotional or practical support. From childhood, members are indoctrinated under a highly effective control system. Children are taught to perceive the world as a constant threat and to believe that any thought or behavior that contradicts Watchtower guidelines puts their eternal salvation at risk. This approach promotes an "us against them" mentality, in which followers are expected to distrust and distance themselves from friends, family, or coworkers who are not part of the organization. As a result, a cycle of indoctrination, isolation, and obedience is established that reinforces dependence on the community. The impact on families is profound. Leaving the organization doesn't just mean changing beliefs, but breaking with the entire known social support structure. This causes enormous emotional suffering, especially in those who were raised with the idea that disobedience is not just a religious failure, but a danger to the very salvation of the soul. These psychological control techniques reinforce members' dependence on the watchtower, while the consequences of deviating from its principles can be extremely severe. However, the organization is not just a religious group, but also a vast economic empire. Financed mainly by contributions from its members, much of its income comes from voluntary donations promoted at meetings and conferences as a sign of devotion. Although it may seem like a simple act of generosity, it is actually a strategy that ensures a constant source of resources for the organization, allowing it to make investments and acquire properties around the world. This financial empire is the subject of much controversy, as members' money is not only used to support community operations but also to maintain an extensive network of real estate investments and others that further strengthen the organization's influence. Jehovah's Witnesses learn that donating is not just an act of charity, but a spiritual obligation. The pressure to contribute is intense, as they are taught that donations are a way to please God. Despite this, the organization maintains a rigid policy of financial opacity, not offering clarity on the destination of the funds raised. This system creates a great financial dependence among members, who often feel obliged to donate beyond their means to meet the imposed expectations. Moreover, the social isolation promoted by the organization limits their economic options, making any attempt at independence even more difficult. For those who decide to question the doctrines or leave the community, this financial dependence becomes an even greater barrier, as they may lose both economic support and the social support that the group provided. Over the years, the organization has also faced various legal problems related to allegations of abuse, discrimination, and even financial fraud. Numerous cases point to cover-ups of crimes within the community, evidencing a pattern of secrecy and protection of the institution over victims. Jehovah's Witness congregations have been criticized for their policy of not involving external authorities in internal matters, which has created an atmosphere of opacity and internal protection. A particularly controversial aspect is the way the organization deals with legal cases, often adopting an aggressive stance and trying to circumvent local laws under the argument of religious freedom. These practices have contributed to an increasingly negative image of the organization in different parts of the world, putting it at odds with governments and those seeking to expose its methods and practices. These aspects of the Jehovah's Witnesses' economic empire reveal how the organization not only exerts spiritual control over its members but also financial and social control. The organization's donation system, the secrecy surrounding its finances, and its questionable legal practices form a network of dependence that preserves the organization's structure while restricting the freedom and well-being of its followers. Throughout its history, Jehovah's Witnesses have been involved in various controversies and scandals, one of the most serious being accusations of sexual abuse. According to various reports, these cases were silenced by the organization's leadership. Instead of turning to authorities, leaders chose to deal with these situations internally, prioritizing the protection of the community's reputation over justice for victims. As a result, numerous abuses went unpunished, without consequences for those responsible. Victims were subjected to intense pressure to remain silent, and in many cases, were urged to forgive their aggressors without a formal investigation being conducted. Beyond the abuses, the organization faced several lawsuits in different countries investigating its internal policies and how it deals with these cases. In response to these accusations, organization representatives often respond evasively, questioning the veracity of testimonies and claiming that criticisms arise from misunderstandings or unjustified attacks. When analyzing Jehovah's Witnesses' doctrines from a biblical perspective, we find several discrepancies that deserve attention. One of the most relevant points is their rejection of the Trinity, one of the fundamental pillars of Christian faith. The Bible, in passages such as Matthew chapter 28 verse 19 and John chapter 1 verse 1, clearly establishes that God, Jesus, and the Holy Spirit are a co-eternal unity, a central concept in the Christian understanding of divinity. However, Jehovah's Witnesses maintain that Jesus is simply a creation of God, denying his full divinity. Another important area where their beliefs conflict with Christian doctrine is salvation. According to biblical teaching, salvation is a divine gift given by grace through faith in Jesus Christ, as mentioned in Ephesians chapter 2 verse 8-9. For Jehovah's Witnesses, however, salvation strictly depends on following the teachings and standards of the organization, as well as the work of preaching, which contradicts the biblical message about redemption. These points generate a profound reflection on what true Christian faith means. Despite claiming to follow the Bible, many of Jehovah's Witnesses' doctrines seem to deviate from its direct teachings, leading to questions about how faithful their interpretation is to the Scriptures. After analyzing their history, their rigid control over members, their practices, and their differences with Christian teachings, it becomes clear that behind the image of a religious movement, there are multiple aspects that can make a person question whether they are really following the truth revealed in the Bible. Now we want to know your opinion. Do you think Jehovah's Witnesses really follow biblical principles, or is there something more behind this organization? Leave your comment below. We love to hear different perspectives, and don't forget to subscribe to the channel and activate the notification bell so you don't miss the next video where we'll continue exploring truths that many prefer to ignore.